What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the BlockHash podcast and happy holidays. Today, we have another wonderful guest, Shady, co founder of Holonym, on the show today to talk about a few different things that they're doing, how they are using human keys for usable privacy, security, and zero trust environments. We're going to talk about their Silk wallet that's in beta that's about to come out, and a number of other exciting things that they are working on. Shady, welcome to the show, man. Pleasure to have you here today. How you doing?
Hi, feeling great. Thanks for having me here. Really excited to get into human keys and some of the topics today.
Likewise, same here. To kick things off and to give people a little bit more context, I'm sure they'd be curious to who you are as well and your background. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your story and how you ended up in the Web3 industry and maybe how some of that also led up to you co-founding Holonym?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think I have a little bit of a different story. I came into Web3 from a completely different angle. I wasn't mining, I wasn't trading, I wasn't collecting NFTs, I wasn't following Vitalik on Twitter. I wasn't doing any of that stuff that you typically hear, which is all great, by the way, and it's always great to hear different people's stories. But for me, I actually came from a different perspective. I was solving scientific problems. I was really interested in how we could use distributed network technology, specifically how we could have decentralized storage networks, preserve scientific knowledge for posterity, and to facilitate interinstitutional collaboration, specifically in the realm of neuroimaging data.
Tell me also, like, how did that kind of lead into Holonym as well? Did you meet up with, because you've co-founded, right? So did you have any partners that you met up with prior and got connected with? Any kind of backstory there that kind of led to its inception?
Yeah, it's so a little kind of Easter egg behind Holonym is so Nanak is my co-founder, Nanak Khalsa, and he was doing his master's at Georgetown. I was finishing up my PhD, and I was working on this problem. How do we get a bunch of research organizations to share their data peer to peer? And it turned out that IPFS was a really great solution for that. So, once I've learned about IPFS, learned about Filecoin and smart contracts, and I got the idea, how could we actually build a research lab in the cloud? Instead of going off to a different institution and going down the typical path, what if I could, bring back the era of the gentle man or gentle person scientists and be able to run my own research laboratory using coordination infrastructure built on Ethereum? So this inspired, along with some other needs of actually trying to solve how we can use IPFS, a hackathon at Georgetown, which attracted Nanak, who was looking for interesting projects to contribute to. Little fast forward, we built something, it worked, and it actually formed the foundation for my first startup, which is called Opsci. It was the first decentralized science or DeSci DAO way back in 2019. And at that point, Nanak was still contributing, but I'd kind of gone off and was really looking to see if it was possible to create this decentralized science ecosystem. Met a lot of success there. Later on, Nanak, I reached out to Nanak, who's still at Georgetown. I was like, hey man, we would love to have you come back and contribute. And he joined me at the Upside Down, where we worked on an identity credentialing system. That was one of the big bottlenecks that we were hitting. And Nanak had some really great ideas on how to use on-chain reveal commit schemes for basically proving that you have an off-chain account or an off-chain attribute on-chain. So this is really powerful, for example, if you want to prove that an Ethereum address belongs to a verified academic. So a little bit after that, we realized, hey, people had actually invented these schemes back in 2016 and 2017. Actually, the early initiators of Gnosis were working on very similar tech to sign in to Ethereum with Google. But back then, it was kind of not to meander too much on backstory, but back then it was like people really didn't like the idea of Web2 accounts controlling your self-sovereign keys. So it didn't catch much traction. And we saw one of the big problems too was the privacy. There wasn't really any privacy on chain if you're going to be doing this. Putting basically commitments of email addresses on chain is probably a bad idea. So that's how we got into zero knowledge. Nanak really led the charge there, created an architecture that allows us to create basically a zero knowledge proof protocol for proving any government off-chain credential or any credential really on-chain with full privacy for the user.
Yeah, that's something I really like about Holonym. There's this adage that goes around now, like Web 2 is connect your Google account, connect Facebook, and Web 3 is like connect your crypto wallet. And I really think it is kind of going that direction with what we can do these days with privacy, security, verifiability, and how that'll likely be attached to like a digital identity or a wallet or whatnot. It's one thing I really like about Holonym when I was looking into you guys is your focus on creating some of those digital rights around privacy, around security. Is that kind of like the core mission for Holonym? And is that the best way to kind of sum up what you guys are aiming to do?
Thanks for the kind words, man. So our core mission for Holonym is to make digital natural rights real. That's really what drives the technology that we build and what we really want to see. Now, you might ask, what do I mean by digital natural rights? I think first it's useful to double click on what natural rights are. These are the cornerstone of democratic societies all across the world, right? And natural rights are typically something that you take for granted, right? Your ability to, freedom of expression, uh, freedom, and these might mean different things to different people depending on their society or context, but uh, freedom to life, liberty, happiness, these sorts of things. And they're often, we expect them to be something that, is just commonplace all around the world. But it's typically governments or legal contracts and the institutions that are responsible for making these rights persistent, making them, quote unquote, inalienable and fundamental. So if you go if you go back through the rich intellectual tradition behind natural rights and this idea of self-sovereignty or agency of the individual, a lot of this was drawn from religious arguments that God had endowed humans with rationality, and anything that we could reason about is ethical or can be derived into a natural right to do X, Y, or Z, like utilize animals for food, like Aquinas argued, or the right to organize into a democratic collective, like later John Locke would argue. So, what's interesting though is all of these perspectives basically, over time they matured into this idea that the only thing that really makes natural rights natural is that you can reason about them, is that you can think about them, you can say, hey, these things are totally, they make sense, they kind of fall out of logical argument, so of course they're real. Today, I think there's a real risk of individuals and institutions, and especially the rise of authoritarian sentiment. Not, who knows which way the world will go, but that really makes us look at natural rights and think, hey, what really is underscoring or anchoring these rights to information, freedom of expression, property, etc. What's really anchoring them? So, what we're interested in is how can we make these rights naturally inalienable, resilient, fundamental, universal? And we see decentralized distributed architecture as a great way to do that, where we can build these values into the technology. And that begins with uh, crypto key self custody. That's what our big the big drum that we're beating.
Got it. That's the next thing I wanted to ask you. Like, how do you guys make this usable and accessible, within Web 3, within zero trust environments? I saw you guys have something called a human key. Can you kind of elaborate on what the concept of a human key is and how it can and probably will be used in some of your guys' applications, but even broadly just in Web 3, where that could take us?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So human keys are pretty much like typical private public key pairs, but instead of being derived from randomness, they're derived from human attributes. So this would be what you are, what you know, what you have. So security questions, biometrics like a face scan, or maybe even something more sci-fi like the signaling of a thought or an intention collected by BCI. It could also be, say, some special hardware that you keep on your person that you keep physically secure, or a combination of all the three. And so we call them human keys because, yes, they are derived from human attributes, but they're also intended to be human friendly. And this is how we get crypto into the hands of literally every single person on the planet. Is we make it intuitively making cryptographic key self custody intrinsically intuitive. It's something that you don't need to think much about to just automatically be able to access a key, create a key that's derived from your attributes, and be able to use it seamlessly with any technology, right? Uh, that you might be interested in, like decentralized finance, or being able to prove that you're a unique human, or being able to create an identity to interact with governments or other types of social services.
Okay. And then do you have like a specific network or protocol that creates these human keys as well? I saw you guys had something called the Mishti Network. Is that, a key component no pun intended, a key component in creating those
Nice.
human keys?
Yeah, nice one. Yes, so one really important component of human keys, or feature of human keys, is that they're built on a resilient architecture. So the idea is, if the company suddenly evaporated for whatever reason, would people still be able to access these self-custodial keys? The way that we do that is we leverage economic proof of stake, economic security of Ethereum proof of stake. And we use that to seed a decentralized network where operators are incentivized to provide this infrastructure. So when somebody, say, has to, say somebody loses all their stuff and ends up like on a bus somewhere, getting off a bus somewhere in a different country, and they need to recover their account and their assets and be able to prove that, hey, I'm from this country and have these credentials, they'd be able to just present themselves to the network, right? So being able to, with any device or any computer, they can um, access it and then be able to prove that they are who they say they are and derive that key. And that's only possible if we have this decentralized network of nodes that are incentivized to provide this service for people. And I think it's also worth double clicking on the importance of privacy and trust, where most most biometric approaches typically involve trust in some hardware, whether it's a company server or an enclave, um, or in some third party software. With Mishti Network, what we've done is take that really sensitive human data that's used to create the human key and split it into pieces. So every node in the network is now a participant in a multi-party compute problem, where you're taking each of the individual pieces of data, and we're computing something called the oblivious pseudo-random function. It lets you basically take a low entropy piece of data, say like a voice, which only has, I think, like 20 or 40 bits of entropy, depending on sampling frequency and the context it's recorded in, and be able to derive a 128-bit key at minimum. So this makes the key really, really secure. And because it's split into pieces and uses this MPC primitive called the OPRF, the oblivious pseudorandom function, none of the nodes in the network can actually see the inputs and the outputs. And it's only the user who receives all of those components of the key at the end of the computation that's able to reassemble the key into its functional form.
Interesting. What type of data could be something that a human key could help create security and privacy for? Like, could this be healthcare data? Could this be like metadata, like what type of flavor ice cream I like, or what I like to do on my Sundays? Could this be something a bit more hard form, like your ID or your passport, for maybe global entry, or when you're driving a car, or something kind of like along those lines? Like, what are some like the limitations of what that could be and could be represented by with a human key?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the above. Though I would say, for really sensitive use cases, you would want to choose methods that are really hard to steal or, say, reproduce or guess. But they can be intuitive, right? They can be low entropy. So for example, one of my favorite examples is, say, like a funny dance. Like you can do like a dance that only you can do, um, and say sing while you're doing it, and that's really hard for somebody to fully mimic. That's kind of a silly example, but in a more practical way, it could be, for example, a liveness check that's combined with, say, the flavor of your favorite ice cream, where the key will only be reconstructed if you can prove that it's you in front of the device that's attempting to reconstruct the key, and then also is able to say with your voice what that favorite ice cream is. And there's ways you can mix and match these different components together. The the real key here, with the puns, we'll just keep them coming. The real important thing here, though, is you can take something that's typically low entropy and make it high entropy, so that if you try to brute force the key by making a bunch of yes/no guesses, and testing to see if the key is valid, it's something that's very computationally hard to do. Even if, say, the original data, like say a face scan or fingerprints, are would have less guesses if you just use them on their own to create the key. So that comes from the randomness that the network provides for the key derivation.
And then are you guys starting to build out use cases for this already? I know that you mentioned a Silk wallet that you guys have in beta. Kind of curious if that's like a good example of where human keys can be workable and prevalent. But also if there's other use cases and things that you guys have maybe started to work on that you might think are very viable for a lot of people that may be coming.
Yeah, we originally built Mishti Network to decentralize the key creation for wallets. So kind of like a Web3 auth, but instead of one application, one key, because with Web3 auth, if you're familiar, it's a decentralized key derivation network. Um, and it actually exposes the private key to the application that creates it for you. So this makes it possible for an application to let you sign in with your social, like your Twitter account or your Google account, but for the application to actually be able to sign stuff for you on your behalf, it needs to have access to the private key, which isn't great. So that means that each application gets an individual private key that you can only use with that app. And that's the same case for other services too, like Privy, where you have one key to one application. So what's more useful is if you have a key that you can keep private, that you don't need to trust a third party with, and that you can take across applications, especially if you're going to be using DeFi or um, where universality and reputation is really important. Once we hit that milestone, we showed that this was possible. We started getting a lot of interest in actually a different use case of the OPRF, which is a verifiable privacy preserving nullifier. A nullifier, if you haven't heard of it before, it's a primitive in Semaphore, which is a tool used for creating zero knowledge identity proofs. And basically, what a nullifier does is it's usually derived from some uniquely identifying information like a name, date of birth, maybe biometrics. And the nullifier is used in the creation of a zero knowledge proof to prevent double spend of a zero knowledge proof. So if you prove that you're a unique human for an airdrop, with your nullifier, you can claim the airdrop only once and prove that you've only done so once. So it's really important for civil attacks and determining bots against humans and all of that. But the problem is most nullifiers don't have enough entropy, and a properly motivated adversary could make enough yes/no guesses to reconstruct, say, the outputs of a zero knowledge proof that uses that nullifier to guess your name or date of birth or whatever data it's derived from. So Mishti's been getting a lot of traction amongst early interest amongst builders that are looking to upgrade their zero knowledge proof derivation for identity to include this really secure nullifier creation. And it's something we're speaking in more detail with the PSC from the Ethereum Foundation Privacy Scaling Explorations Group, and a few other projects that are looking at some novel use cases.
Very cool. And before this, I know you mentioned that you have a Silk wallet in beta, and that'll be coming out pretty soon. What can you tell us about Silk wallet? How will that utilize human keys as well? What are some of the benefits? Things make it different, unique.
Yeah, so Silk is built on Mishti. It allows you to basically interact with the Mishti network, create your human key, and then use your human key. So whether it's using your human key to trade tokens or mint NFTs or even prove facts about your identity, like you're from a certain country or above a certain age, or actually not on a sanctions list, which is really, really useful for DeFi applications and real world asset protocols that want to do business in the real world, where you actually need to show that you're meeting regulatory requirements for doing business. Um, so Silk lets you do all of that with human keys. What makes Silk really special is its architecture. It's really a paradigm shift in how we think about crypto key self custody and crypto UX in general. So Silk is an embeddable iframe. It's completely labelable. You can put it on any website and make it look in any way. Um, it's it allows users to really easily interact and onboard into an application, and it does so without making any sacrifices in security. And that's because of its 2PC architecture. So what Silk actually does is it takes that human key and it splits it into two, so that even if the user has malware on their device, their wallet's not compromised because that second shard exists in a different network. And that network will only allow the user to reconstruct their keys if they can prove that it's them that's initiating that transaction. So you can implement policies where if suddenly a transaction request to withdraw $1 million out of your wallet comes out of nowhere, you would have multiple redundancies in place that prevent that from happening. So it helps with blind signing attacks, especially when used with a hardware wallet. I think that's probably the best implementation of Silk. Like if you're a whale and had a very large sum of money that you didn't feel comfortable putting in a hot wallets, but maybe didn't really love the UX of moving around all the time with a physical hard wallet, you could combine the two together to have a really nice UX for managing very sensitive accounts or sums of money. Um, so Silk is coming out really soon. It's been in beta now for about almost a year. Um, we've had to solve a lot of really difficult problems to make this possible, where you know we're basically bringing multiple decentralized networks together to provide a sort of resilience, privacy preservation, and security that really hasn't been seen in wallet architecture before. And users are going to be able to start playing with it in January of 2025. So we're really excited to get this out in the world.
And then it doesn't need like any browser extension or app downloads or anything kind of like that.
No, we'll be developing some anyway for users that want to have that option and have like kind of a native vanilla experience. But the whole thing about Silk is it's more of a protocol. It's not a wallet as a service. It's a wallet as a protocol. So it can be embedded within a web application and hidden behind the scenes completely, right? Where you can just interact with a game or a typical e-commerce website. But actually, what you're doing is authenticating to that site and creating your human key and signing transactions with that. And that could just look like a checkout flow.
Okay, that's very fascinating. And you said that's coming out in Q1, maybe January 2025.
Yeah, if all goes well, it'll be out by the end of January 2025, but Q1 for sure.
And then in terms of managing identity, I also saw you guys had something called Zeronym. How does that kind of allow people to prove identity without at the same time kind of revealing themselves, doxing themselves completely? What are some of the advantages to that?
Yeah, so Zeronym started off as a project to help on-chain organizations, DAOs, raise money for political advocacy and lobbying. So political lobbying and civic advocacy. And one of the our first client was Andrew Yang, where they raised a bunch of money through NFT sales, and they wanted to put it towards their Humanity Forward campaign for addressing UBI and anti-poverty sort of stuff. But they had a problem, right, where they didn't check that the people donating money were actually from the US. And there are laws about how you could donate money in this way. So we found out about their problem. Somebody reached out to us, and we put together a demonstrator that showed how you could have a zero knowledge identity verification flow so that everyone in the DAO would still remain anonymous, but off chain they could prove that they are American residents, and then they could gate a snapshot strategy to basically vote on how the treasury is spent while remaining in compliance. That's how we got started. Since then, Zeronym has scaled to become a general purpose identity verification flow, particularly for proof of humanity, as well as proof of what we call clean hands, so that you are, not on an AML or sanctions list, which is some great utility for DeFi protocols that want to be in compliance with the law because maybe they're working with banks or more traditional service financial service providers. Yeah, so Zeronym is actually embedded within the Silk wallet, and it lends some of its identity verification features into the UI flows for Silk. So, for example, proving that you're a human for airdrops is something that that users that many users are already using today. Almost 2 million users in our ecosystem today, actually. And one other bit too is the security features around Silk. So, for example, adding additional 2FA mechanisms or multi-factor authentication around, say, transactions or spend limits could be done with the identity proofs with complete ZK for privacy around those authentication mechanisms, which increases security and also reduces the risk, for example, of say somebody like leaking your data or accessing your wallet without you knowing it.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was a way to protect against some of these large data leaks that are happening all the time. I feel like there's a couple massive ones every single year in the US. It's quite unfortunate. It'd be cool if that data leaked was not like all of your data and you had to have like a key to like de-encrypt it and stuff. So excited for how some of this can play into the Web2 world as well. A fun question I want to ask. I saw an article on Holonym recently talking, where you were talking actually about natural digital rights. And we talk a lot about this stuff in the real world too, but we're moving slowly and actually more quickly into a digital world as well. And I was curious about, the metaverse and how expansive that's starting to get and the games that are being played and these micro versions of it in select spaces and for work environments, for fun play environments, and the importance of identity in some of those areas. And was curious maybe how Holonym can help resolve some issues around identity, security, maybe even lack of interoperability in metaverse style use cases, maybe in the near future. Have you guys kind of like worked on tackling some of those issues as well? Like, is this something that's also crosses over into the digital realm? Want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One comment I would like to make is just in general that the metaverse has been here for a little while, even though we didn't call it that, right? Like, and that, like, I think Real ID really showed that your driver's license could become, just a card that you put into your wallets, like a digital credential. So a lot of the rights that we already take for granted, like right to personhood or right to, say, certain privileges within a country or civic infra, those are becoming digitized. And believe it or not, the metaverse is building itself, whether we're working on it immediately in Web3 or not, it'll be here. So that's why it's especially important that we build a metaverse that takes the best of technology, uh, the kind of maturity that we've reached at this point with the benefit of the retrospect we have on what's worked and what hasn't worked and all the leaks and all the security issues and quantum on the horizon as well. And so we really don't want to end up in a world like, for example, in William Gibson's Neuromancer, right, where these corporations basically just raced to monetize data as quickly as possible, to amass data as quickly as possible, and a lot of the infrastructure of the internet was ignored along the way. And in Neuromancer, you have this really ironic situation where corporations are like dragons sitting on these large treasure troves of gold, right, in the form of human data. And that data actually like can bridge into your mind. So they've actually monetized data going so far as to reach into your mind and your thoughts because you interact with the internet through, like, you're plugged in through your brain. Um, and so it's fascinating because these companies like built this entire infra to do this amazing stuff and unlock new commerce, but at the same time it's still super vulnerable because it's a patchwork of protocols where privacy was never really kind of thought of as important. And we see that today. Like, Gibson wrote this in 1984, but today that's what we see is a patchwork of protocols that don't use best practices in cryptography to assure basic security and privacy for everyone as kind of a default setting. Now, for the metaverse, that's what we need is we need to be building this on, I'm not going to say specifically zero knowledge technology, but at the very least, privacy preserving technology that makes it very difficult for certain types of exploits or to be able to just revoke somebody's right to privacy. That shouldn't be something that's done easily by either a bad actor or a company. Um, so that's just a comment on the side. But from our perspective, when it comes to the metaverse, we've been building all of the primitives that you would need to build digital societies, completely digital worlds, whether for work or for play. Universal accounts, having human keys that you can take with you across different meta worlds or metaverse worlds, is definitely a prerequisite. Having controllable access over your identity and being able to port your reputation with complete control and privacy across these worlds is something that's going to be, we think, really, really important. Um, and yeah, we're really excited to see what happens. One kind of unexpected area of the metaverse that I've seen recently is the emergence of special economic zones. So these are kind of similar to Balaji's network states, but these are completely digital, let's say like subdomains within an existing country. Nigeria has been experimenting with this, where they basically create this like kind of like Estonia, where you can create a digital credential, and once you KYC and you verify, you can actually get a visa to Nigeria and get all the rights that come with doing business in Nigeria. So I think we're going to see more of this because, like, why wouldn't a country tap into new ways of tax revenue generation, especially if they can do so on existing digital commerce that just hasn't been, that hasn't been formalized or regulated in this way?
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, the world is more and more going digital, and the metaverse is starting to really build itself and proliferate everywhere. So it raises a lot of questions, even for me, like how do we like secure our data and our identity? How do we prove that, especially when we're walking around as these avatars and wearing funky outfits and probably, probably not even a human. um, you got to wonder like how do we build that into these types of environments and worlds and economies? And yeah, it's interesting, and I think this is a good solution for it as well. So what's coming up on your guys's roadmap for the next year? You mentioned Silk Wallet in early 2025 here. What else might be coming up that you think people should keep an eye out for? Any cool updates, new features, partnerships, maybe some events you guys might be attending? What can you tell us?
Yeah, 2025 is going to be for us the year of scaling. So doubling down on the research and development technology, the research and development directions that we've been focused on the past couple of years have reached a point where they're ready for mainstream adoption. So this starts with the launch of Silk wallets this January, and also the launch of the Mishti mainnet a little around the same time. And we're really, really excited towards the middle of the year when we can celebrate decentralization of the protocol, when we'll be completely live as an actively validated service in AVS on EigenLayer with incentivized operators providing the infrastructure for the human keys. So right now we actually have a developer rewards program that allow early adopters to basically earn a stake within the network before it launches by embedding Silk into their website and onboarding new users that perform actions within the ecosystem. So there's a couple other things that I'm not quite ready to announce just yet, but a lot of really, really big news coming down the line in the next couple of weeks and months, actually.
Awesome. And then do you guys have presence on social media? Do you have any communities, LinkedIn's, Telegrams? Where can people go if they want to dive in, learn a bit more, maybe interact with you guys?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You can go straight on holonym.id. That's www.holonym.id. And you can find a lot of our information there. You can create a wallet, create a human key. Also follow us on Twitter. We're just 0x Holonym. And then you can find all of our information there. So do reach out if you have any questions or write us a note if you're interested in using this technology or want to learn more.
Awesome, man. Shadi, this has been a great episode. Have learned a lot about what you guys are doing with Holonym. I'm sure a lot of people have as well. It's very exciting, very useful. Human keys, I think, from what you're explaining, will be pretty big. Silk, looking forward to that. I'll try it out myself. I think it'll be good to start building a little bit of a digital identity anyways. I think we all need to. Um, But no, this has been great, man. Keep me posted on what's going on with Holonym in the new year as things start to develop. And let's arrange another episode, and we'll catch up for a part two and give people some more updates.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much. I really appreciated the time today.